The savannah was quiet. Only the sounds of the native creatures disturbed the peace that pervaded. The wind gently blew the gases, creating a ripple effect across the wide open spaces. The spring greens were now fading to the gold of summer. Beside the greens and golds were the few wild flowers that were still in bloom. They brought small touches of reds, oranges, yellows, and blues to the savannah. The sky was also so clear and unpolluted that the aquamarine showed its truest color. The grasslands seemed to go on forever in every direction. That is until it hit the ring. Other than the ring, there was no technology on the planet, and the ring had been there for millennia. Generation after generation had been born, grown and died within the ring's shadow. No animal was afraid of it, and even a few avians had built a precarious nest on top. For the ring stood upright so that if one stood before it, one could look through to the prairie on the other side. It stood as tall as a tree, and the ring's circumference was thicker than all but the mightiest ones. If any of the residents of the planet were intelligent, they would have noticed that symbols were etched on the surface. But the ring wasn't alone. A smaller device stood just a few meters in front. It consisted of two circles, one within the other, and a half-sphere in the heart of the smallest circle. Both circles mirrored the symbols from the ring, while the half-sphere, if one was to look under the dirt, was orange-red. Both the ring and its companion were covered in dirt, leaves, and animal droppings after thousands of years open to the elements. This peaceful place had never known any disturbance other than the day-to-day trials of living, until today. Today the ring began to spin. The noise of its motion was so sudden and so alarming that it sent bird and beast scurrying for cover. The spinning continued until the ring came to a point where one of the symbols lined up with the light on the ring. The light had been dormant the same as the ring, but now came alive when the symbol stopped under it. After the light came on, the ring once again began to spin. It completed the same process 5 more times. Each time a different symbol would trigger a new light. After the 7th symbol and the corresponding light came on, the ring stopped. Silence reigned for a heartbeat. Then, with a loud thunderclap of sound, light began to emanate from the center of the ring in a vortex of what looked like water, whooshed forth and collapsed in on itself. What was left was a smooth surface that looked like the surface of a lake, but was in between the ring, vertical from the ground. No sooner had the quiet once again returned to the savannah when something emerged from the new surface. At first, only a metal arm protruded from near the base. Then the entire mechanical device came through and down the dirt ramp that had been created from the years of dirt and debris that had collected at the base of the ring. It rolled forward for a meter or two, then came to a halt near the ring's smaller companion. Whirling sounds could be heard from the machine as a tiny camera swiveled to get a look at its surroundings. After a few minutes, new shapes emerged from the pool of light. First 1, then 2, 3, and finally 4 separate shapes came through. 3 were human, the 4th was a Jaffa. "Welcome to another galaxy, kids," Colonel Jack O'Neill said to his team, SG-1. "Well, sir, we won't actually know if it really is another galaxy until we can get some scans of the night sky and compare them with Takra star charts," Major Samantha Carter replied to her superior. "You mean to tell me, Sam, that the Asgard temple we found on P3X 576 might be wrong?" Daniel Jackson, the team's cultural and archaeological expert, spoke up. "I am in agreement with Major Carter. Teal'c, the only non-human member of SG-1, said. Since it was the ancients that built the Stargate network, how can we rely on what the Asgard say? They've never lied to us before," Daniel said. "They've also neglected to mention certain things to us," Jack conceded. "Doesn't matter though. Carter, you and Teal'c start setting up and waved a hand at the mount. Stuff you need to set up. Daniel, you're with me. Let's see if we can find any clues before they do. Daniel Jackson was hot, tired, and frustrated. He and Jack had been walking for 3 hours and had yet to come across anything other than more grasslands. And that was the odd thing about the whole patrol. Normally SG-1 only had to walk a short distance from the Stargate to find some kind of sign that civilization had once been or was still on the planet. But GP3X001 had yet to yield its secrets. He had no doubt that he was standing on a planet outside of the Milky Way galaxy. Even though Sam had said something about a wormhole not being able to remain stable across the distances from galaxy to galaxy, at least that was Daniel's interpretation of what she said. He, Jack, and Teal'c only understood Sam about half the time. Yet despite the facts Sam gave, Daniel had read the temple on P3X 576. The Asgard rarely left any kind of presence on the worlds they visited, and if they did, it was in their Norse guise. That's what was unique about this temple. I had been in the Asgard language and had quite specifically stated, or warned would be a better way to put it, that the gate address inscribed on the walls would lead to another galaxy. One that they said was in turmoil and not to be entered until its citizens could bring about peace. Daniel guessed the warning made sense. Since his own galaxy was at war with the Goa'uld, he didn't want any new parties to join the fight, unless they were on the humans' side. That was part of the reason they'd come, to find new allies. The Takra were fine but weren't always inclined to provide help if their own interest weren't severed. The same went for the Jaffa. That, coupled with the fact that any advanced human they'd come across were not willing to give up their technology to a less advanced culture. The other half of SG-1's presence here was simple curiosity and the chance to be the first humans in another galaxy. Sighing his frustration, Daniel called for Jack to stop and take a break. Spying some rocks poking out from the grass, he and Jack made for them to use as a chair. Sitting down and pulling out his cantina, he tilted his head back and took a long swallow. Removing the cantina from his lip but keeping his head back, Daniel gazed up at the sky. He wasn't really looking at anything, just relaxing when something caught his eye. A black shape could be seen and it looked like it was coming toward them. Jack, Daniel said. Yeah, Jack replied. Do you see that? Daniel went on. See what, Daniel? Colonel O'Neill had been surveying their surroundings. Look up. Following Daniel's advice, Jack looked up. The black shape, actually now it was two shapes, were clearly visible and getting larger by the moment. Now I see it. Looks like ships. One looks like a ship. The other just looks like a meteor, Jack said. I guess there's some kind of intelligent life round here. If they were intelligent, why wouldn't the ship just get out of the meteor's path? Jack looked at Daniel, then back at the now clearly visible ship and meteor, then said, That's a good question. Then before their eyes, the two friends got their answer. The lead ship, with a saucer shape, with two protruding arms coming out of the bow, took a hard-to-port turn. What appeared to be red laser fire shot out from its top and bottom and was aimed for the meteor. But it wasn't a meteor because it dogged the laser fire and banked to follow. When it got closer, plasma seemed to erupt from the meteor ship. The saucer ship barely dogged and then took another hard turn, only to starboard this time. While all this happened, the speed of the descending ships brought them into a clear view of the two men. Daniel began to feel that maybe they were a little too close but couldn't tear his eyes from the battle to voice his concern. Just as the saucer ship was about to take a direct hit, it dogged at the last second, and in the place it vacated appeared a new ship. Smaller than the saucer and roughly the same size as the meteor, it shot more red laser fire from its four gun emplacements at the ends of its four wings, headed straight for the meteor. They hit dead on and chucks began to tear off and became real meteors. With the introduction of this new threat, the meteor ship lost track of the saucer ship, which managed to move behind it. Now the meteor ship was the hunted, and with two ships tailing it, the vessel didn't have a prayer. With what looked like missiles coming from the fighter, the meteor ship broke up and plummeted towards the surface. The other two weren't in much better shape. In fact, if Daniel looked closely, he could see there was a wobble to the saucer ship and that it was still losing altitude. As Daniel and Jack watched, Daniel suddenly realized the saucer ship wasn't going to be able to pull up in time, and to make matters worse, the ship was headed straight for them. Jack. I think we better move. Don't worry, Daniel. The ship is going to overshoot us. Right. How do you know? He asked. I'm in the Air Force, remember, Jack said with confidence. Somehow that doesn't make me feel better, came Daniel's sarcastic reply. Even though Jack was right and the ship flew over their head, it was so close that both men involuntarily ducked as it did so. Staying in a crouch and spinning on one knee, they saw the ship land not so softly about 500 meters away. The fighter, that Daniel thought looked like a flying X, which had made the save, made a perfect landing close by. Jack and Daniel looked at each other. Jack shrugged. Might as well take a look, he said. Daniel wasn't so sure. What about the last time we got in the middle of someone else's fight? He reminded Jack. It doesn't look like they need our help in that regard, but they might need our help if someone is hurt. Can't argue with you there, Daniel conceded. Good, Jack said and got out his radio. Carter, Teal'c, do you copy? We read you, sir, Major Carter's voice came back. Did you guys see the show? Yes, sir. Looked like some kind of battle. Well, one of the ships that won went down by our position. Daniel and I are going to check it out. I want you and Teal'c to meet us here. Roger that, Colonel. Good, we're roughly 2 miles southeast from the Stargate, Jack told her. I copy, we'll meet you there as soon as we can. Carter out. Putting away the radio, Jack turned back to Daniel and said, "Let's not keep the locals waiting," and headed for the downed ships with Daniel following right behind. Han Solo was not happy. The Vong had gone and blown off his long-range antenna dish. Which, by the way, was Holonet capable. It didn't matter that the antenna had been lost numerous times before, it was the fact that it was gone and would need to be replaced, again. Not to mention the Falcon and Jade Shadow were now stuck on the Tingle arm with no way to contact Mon Calamari or the fleet. Normally that wouldn't be so bad, but the fact that there was a Vong picket force on their tail meant that he would like to get back to Galactic Alliance territory as soon as possible. But first the aft repulsor lift needed to be repaired. Thank goodness the Luke and Mara had finished with the skips in orbit to be able to lend him a hand. He'd been too busy to lift the Falcon out of its dive to shake the coral skipper. Now that he had a breather, it was time to get to work. Mara and the Jade Shadow were in orbit keeping a watch out for more Vong ships. As he headed back towards the engine room, Leia and Waru were already started on the repairs, so he decided to check on the external damage. He met Luke at the bottom of the ramp and threw his arm over the kid's shoulder. He really should stop thinking of a guy with a 3-year-old son as a kid, and said, "That was a good save." "Just a little something I picked up from Wedge," Luke said. "Remind me to send him and Ela a good bottle of Corellian ale when we get back." "So what's the damage report on the Falcon?" "A couple of problems. The aft repulsor lift, not to mention my antenna, should only take a few hours to fix." "Can Mara hold out that long?" "I talked with her before I landed and she said everything was under control. Said she would lead the analog away from our position and do a micro jump out of the system, then swing back." "Sounds good. You sure you don't want to be up there with her? When Mara says she has everything under control, then stay out of her way because she's got it under control." "Sounds like Leia." Their inspection of the ship turned up only small localized damage where the shields had collapsed. "Looks like the new overlapping shield system I installed before we left for the corporate sector worked," Han thought to himself. As they began their repairs, two things happened. First, Han banged his thumb with the hydro spanner, and second, a voice spoke up from behind him. "Hello there. Need a hand?" Both he and Luke whirled around and there stood two men. One was slightly taller than the other and had started to go gray at the temples. The shorter one had rich brown hair and had some kind of seeing device on his face. Both men wore dark green jumpsuits with black vest packs, and the tall one carried a weapon Han had never seen before. But what really set his nerves on edge was the fact that these two had snuck up on a Jedi Master. "Where the hell did you come from?" came Han's startled reply. "We saw the battle and came to see if anyone was hurt," Shorty said. "I think what he means is, how you got on the planet." "The scans showed no technology present," Luke clarified, eyeing the two. The tall one shrugged. "We haven't been here very long. We came through the Stargate about 4 hours ago." "Stargate?" Han and Luke mouthed to each other. "By the way, my name is Daniel Jackson and this is Colonel Jack O'Neill," Shorty, now identified as Daniel, said. Han still wasn't so sure about these guys. Their outfits screamed military or militia. He looked over at Luke to see if he got any Jedi sense about them, but all he got was a head shake. Taking that to mean that Luke got no danger sense from them, Han decided to be friendly. Or at least until he had reason to be otherwise. Sticking out his hand at Colonel O'Neill, he introduced himself. "Han Solo. This is my ship, the Millennium Falcon. This here is Luke Skywalker." They all shook hands and Han noticed that neither man showed any recognition to either his or Luke's names. But before he could reflect on this information, Colonel O'Neill began speaking to Luke. "That was some pretty fancy flying." "Ever the modest one," Luke said. "Just did what was necessary." "What was that ship you were fighting?" "At first I thought it was a meteor, but then it started maneuvering," Daniel asked. This nearly knocked Han over with shock. Being so close to the initial invasion corridor, there wasn't a sentient in this region of space that didn't know what a Vong vessel or skip looked like. He was about to ask what hole they had been living in when new voices broke in. "Colonel," the female voice said. Han looked and saw a blonde woman and a large dark-skinned man coming towards the Colonel and Daniel. "Carter, Teal'c, glad you could join the party. Let me introduce you to the pilots responsible for that aerial demonstration," the Colonel called to them. The second round on introductions commenced and Han learned that Carter was the woman and was actually Major Samantha Carter and Teal'c was just Teal'c. But what he still didn't understand was how the four of them got here and didn't know what a coral skipper was. Once again glancing over to his father-in-law, Han saw Luke gazing at Teal'c. He recognized the look. It was the one his entire family got when sensing with the Force. As Major Carter related to Colonel O'Neill about some scientific babble, he asked Luke what he felt. I'm not sensing any danger from them. Yet the four of them feel different, especially Teal'c. I actually feel two separate presences from him. Nodding and wondering what to make of this new information, Han heard the end of Major Carter's conversation with her friends. But how did they get here? That's what Han wanted to know, only in reverse. That's just what I'm still trying to figure out, Han said, breaking into their conversation. How did the four of you get here without a ship? We did not require a starship, Captain Solo, Teal'c said. We came via the Stargate. This is the second time one of you has said that, Luke put in. What is a Stargate if it's not a ship? Major Carter started to explain but never got past. It's a wormhole, before the roar of engines drowned her out. Looking up, Han saw the Jade Shadow circle their position. Luke was already running towards his X-Wing. We've got company. Han heard Mara shout through his comlink. Colonel O'Neill must have heard him, for he said, "What's going on?" I think the Vong have located our position, Han called to him as he headed for the Falcon's ramp. If I were you, I'd get back to this Stargate of yours and get the hell out of here as fast as you can. Well, why should we worry if these US Han Vong are after you? Daniel called to him. This brought Han to halt at the bottom of the boarding ramp. He just stared at the foursome. They all must have some mental problem, he thought. Yelling up into the Falcon, telling Leia and Waru to get ready to fly, he then went back to the group of misfits to explain just why they should be worried. Now look here. I don't know what rock you've been hiding under for the last 5 years, but the Vong don't care who you are. If you're not one of them, then you're fair game. When you put it that way. Jack, maybe we should head back, Daniel conceded. Just then a whoosh of air was felt and the Falcon's top turret began firing. Then the field exploded as plasma bursts hit, causing everyone to duck. Raising his head, Han saw Luke's his X-Wing sprinting for altitude as Mara fitted the shadow in behind him. That made up Han's mind up for him. He'd have to take the misfits with him. Swearing, he looked over at them and was surprised to see that they were arranged back to back with weapons ready. At least they aren't totally stupid, he thought. Hey, he shouted. If you guys want to de-live, get your butts on board. They looked indecisive, but another flyby from the US Han Vong got them moving, running up the boarding ramp as more plasma burst hit the ground where they'd be standing. When everyone was on board, Han hit the ramp closed and ran for the cockpit. He had done his good deed for the day and couldn't care less what the four of them did, just so long as they stayed out of his way. By the time the Millennium Falcon reached the stratosphere, Jack had had enough. He just couldn't sit here, not knowing what was going on. SG-1 had found a place to strap in for liftoff, but now Jack wanted to know what Captain Solo would do to get them out of here. Getting up and talking off his pack, Jack set it down by Carter and said, "I'm headed for the cockpit. Carter, watch my pack." Glancing over at Daniel, he added, "I want all my dessert rations when I get back." Daniel just gave him an innocent look back. As he headed in the direction the captain had went, he only made it as far as the hallway when the ship's intercom came on. "If any of you back there that can shoot, get to the bottom turret," said Captain Solo's voice. "We're gonna need some cover fire to get out of this one." Turning back to his team and pointing at Teal'c, Jack said, "Why don't you give them a hand?" As the Jaffa headed for the guns, Jack resumed heading for the cockpit. After 2 wrong turns, he found Solo and a woman that he assumed was his co-pilot. Taking a seat behind her, Jack watched as the two seemed to work in perfect unison. Switching his attention from inside to out, he saw Luke's fighter dance in and out of the line of fire. The ship which had landed and preceded the attack provided covering fire. Jack noticed that the woman pilot seemed to think she was Luke's wingmate. The way she flew was incredible, especially since her ship was 4 times as large and couldn't be half as maneuverable. If he paid really close attention, Jack could have sworn that she was anticipating his moves. Even though he could do nothing to help, Jack felt better just being able to watch and assess his team's situation. So far he wasn't too worried. That fact that Captain Solo brought them on board instead of being shot down showed a lot about his character. Despite his gruff manner, Jack liked him already. As Jack watched the action, wishing there were something more he could do, Captain Solo turned in his seat to reach a few switches behind him, then noticed Jack. Evidently he hadn't known Jack was here because he said, "What are you doing here?" Knowing he'd have to smooth talk Solo in order to stay, he was about to give him a witty remark but never got the chance to deliver. "Han," the woman yelled. "Luke and Mara have got us a clear exit vector. I've already got the Navi-commuter set." Turning his attention back to the task at hand, Solo began flicking a new series of switches. "What about those guys?" Captain Solo said. They said they have it covered. I gave them our destination so they know where to meet us. If there's one thing I've learned, it's not to argue with a Skywalker. They're going to do something stupid anyway, Solo mumbled. Sounds like someone else I know, the woman replied. Jack caught a mischievous smile that led Jack to believe she was more than just Solo's co-pilot. Facing back to the viewport, he saw everything was under control. Or, he thought, at least organized chaos. Speaking up for the first time, he said, "Looks like they're fine. Luke just went to FTL." Glancing at the sensors, Han confirmed, "He's right." Then as they watched, the other ship jumped as well. "Then what are we sticking around for?" As Han said this, he pulled back on two levers in the center of the control board. Stars streamed from pinpoints to streaks as the Falcon jumped into hyperspace. Leaning back in his seat, Jack let out a sigh. He and SG-1 were safe, yet stuck to wherever the Falcon was headed. He seriously doubted Captain Solo would turn the ship around even if he asked real nice. But on the bright side, Jack felt confident that his team was in another galaxy. Now they just had to figure out why there were humans in it. "So, what happens now?" Jack asked. He really knew nothing about these people and wanted to know what their plans were. "Just who are you anyway?" the woman asked instead. "Forgot to mention we picked up some company, sweetheart. This is Colonel Jack O'Neill." "Colonel, this is my wife, Leia Organa Solo." That explained the secret smile. "Now that we can breathe, let's get everything out in the open," Solo said. "I agree." Jack said, and without missing a beat he added, "How the heck are there humans in another galaxy?" "Maybe we should move to the rec room," Leia suggested, giving him a quizzical look. "It seems this might take a while. Good idea. I'm starving and I think I'll want a full stomach when I hear what the Colonel has to say." As they left the cabin and headed back to where SG-1 waited, Jack saw Teal'c and the biggest, hairiest creature he had ever seen, behind him. He knew Teal'c was coming from the direction of the turret guns, so the being must have been in the top turret. With a roar that sent Jack's ears ringing, the creature came up and gave Solo a tremendous hug. Jack winced when he heard something crack. "Waru. Put me down," Han gasped. "You don't have to give a victory roar and crush me every time we survive a battle." More roars, quieter this time, and some barks, grunts, and rumbles came from Waru. "It's okay, pal. Just cool it with the life depth stuff." Moving over to stand by Teal'c, Jack asked, "Did you get any of that?" "I did not," Teal'c stated. Deciding to get more information about the hairy thing later, he asked, "So how did it go?" He needed more information about the ships that attacked them because at some point they'd have to go back to the planet. The Yuuzhan Vong ships are formidable. They are unlike anything I have ever seen. Coming from Teal'c, that was high praise and worried Jack to no end. Not wanting to give his worries away, he simply said, "Yeah, that seems to be the trend round here." When everyone was in the rec room, silence reigned. What was unusual about this was the room was packed. With SG-1, Captain Solo and his wife, plus the big hairy guy, all available seats were taken. Jack and Solo had to stand. As Jack surveyed the room and thought how this place couldn't get any more crowded, it did. In shuffled a tall gold robot and it headed straight for Captain Solo. Captain Solo, it said. "Not now, 3PO, Solo practically growled at the thing. And of course, now that it had talked, Carter was fascinated. "That's amazing. I've never seen such an articulate robot before. I beg your pardon, ma'am, but I am negative 3PO, a protocol human cyborg relations droid," it said. Jack had to stifle a laugh. He'd never heard a machine sound so indignant. It was also worth it to see the look on Carter's face. She was rarely ever corrected, and it was great to see someone do it. It was even better to see a droid do it. Stammering, she said, "I'm sorry. It didn't mean to offend." Before 3PO could accept her apology, Captain Solo broke in, "Unless you're here to tell us we're all going to die, 3PO, shut up." Looking even more indignant, "If that's possible for something without facial expressions," 3PO said, "Yes, sir," and went to stand in the corner. "Now before we have any more interruptions," Solo said as he pulled out what looked like a ration bar. Jack nodded. Food did sound good. When no one else started speaking, he realized every eye was turned towards him. Okay, so he'd go first then. "Hi, Colonel Jack O'Neill here. Some of you know me, some of you don't." Turning to face Carter, he said, "And now Major Carter is going to explain how we got here." He motioned for her to get up, and once she did so, he took her seat. Well, basically we came by Stargate, which is a device that can create a stable wormhole from one point in space to another," Carter started out. Normally these gates only take us to places within our own galaxy, but we found one that brought us here, or more accurately to that planet we just escaped from. You're kidding me, right? Solo said. No sir, Carter assured him. In fact, I wasn't entirely sure we had left our galaxy until we saw your ship and the Vuas-Hanvong ship. And how does that confirm anything? Leia asked. Well, because we have been to a number of planets in our galaxy. All of these planets were situated so we could get a sampling of what life was like in different regions of the galaxy, and frankly, we've never seen a human culture that had your kind of technology, nor have we seen or heard anything about these Vuas-Hanvong. Okay, I guess that makes sense, Captain Solo said. But that doesn't explain how you got to this other galaxy then back. Speaking up for the first time, Daniel replied, that's actually something we wanted to ask you. You see, humans originated in our galaxy, on the planet Earth. What both Han and Leia said in unison. That impossible, Leia continued. Galactic records on Alderaan have human history that went as far back as 180,000 years ago. Mistress Leia, the droid spoke up. That is not entirely correct. The earliest known human records for Alderaan are only 30,000 years old, and the earliest confirmed records for the species is only 120,000 to 100,000 years ago. Do your records show what planet humans evolved on? Daniel asked 3PO. Jack could actually see his excitement, though he wasn't quite sure what for. No sir, 3PO responded. The report comes from Corellia, which can never be substantiated. And why is that? Daniel eagerly asked. Corellia is a system that was built, it didn't evolve, Solo answered for him. But how is that possible? Carter asked. No one knows, Solo conceded. Many scientists and historians think that the 3 inhabitable planets in the system were brought together by Centerpoint Station. It predates even the Corellian system. Then if you can't confirm what planet humans evolved on, then is it possible for you to agree that you might all come from Earth? But how is that possible? Until the Vong came, we didn't even know if it was possible to leave our own galaxy, let alone millennia ago. Well, the evolutionary timeline shows us that modern-day humans evolved around 150,000 to 100,000 years ago. But the Stargate network is rumored to be even older. Around 3 million years old. You mean you didn't build it? Organo Solo asked. No, Daniel explained. We believe a race only known as the Ancients did and then disappeared from our galaxy. This is just crazy, Solo spoke up. Seeing everyone was starting to get a little overwhelmed with prospects of humans in 2 separate galaxies, Jack changed the subject. So just where are we headed anyway? We're headed for the Verity system, Leia said. Why are we headed there? Solo asked his wife. Why not somewhere closer to Mon Calamari? Those are the coordinates I gave Luke and Mara, and Jacen is also supposed to meet us there. Jacen? I thought he was off exploring or searching for himself or whatever Jedi do when bored. He's not bored, Han. He just needs a life direction like Jaina. Leia corrected her husband. Whoever Jacen and Jaina were, Jack couldn't care less. He just wanted to know when SG-1 could get back to GP3X001. Okay, back on track here. Where are we going after the Verity system? The couple looked at him, then at each other. Solo shrugged his shoulders, then said, I guess you'll have to come with us to Mon Cal. There we can decide how to get you home. I assume you need to get back to that Vong-infested planet, right? Unless you know of any other big circles that have wormholes to other galaxies, yeah, Jack said. Actually, Colonel O'Neill, 3PO stated to say. Can it goldenrod? Yes, Captain Solo. Well, if you need to go back, then you'll need a lot more firepower than we can give, Solo sighed. You'll have to plead your case to the Senate and see if they can allot you a few cruisers. But don't count on it.